The morning that would change Marcus Harrington's life forever began exactly like every other morning of his 33 years, with absolute, suffocating perfection. His penthouse alarm chimed at precisely 5:47 a.m., a gentle cascade of piano notes programmed by a sleep specialist who charged $400 an hour to optimize his rest cycles. The automated blinds rose in synchronized choreography with the sunrise, flooding the 1,700-square-foot master bedroom with carefully calibrated natural light that costs more in smart glass technology than most American families spent on housing in a decade. Marcus lay against Egyptian cotton sheets with a thread count so high the number had ceased to carry meaning, staring at a ceiling that had been hand-painted by an Italian artist flown specifically from Florence for the commission. He was, by every measurable standard, one of the most successful men in the United States. At 33, Marcus Harrington had built Harrington Digital Solutions from a college dorm room idea into a technology empire worth $11.4 billion. He was the kind of man whose face appeared on magazine covers beside words like visionary and revolutionary and the future of American innovation. He owned a penthouse in Manhattan, a beach house in the Hamptons, a ski chalet in Aspen, and a villa in Tuscany that he visited exactly once and immediately forgot about. His car collection occupied a climate-controlled garage with better amenities than most apartments. His personal chef prepared meals that had been nutritionally engineered to maximize his cognitive performance. And he was, though he would never have admitted it to a single living soul, desperately, profoundly, and completely lonely. Marcus moved through his morning routine like a machine executing a program. He ran on his treadmill overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The city spread below him like a circuit board of lights and ambition, the kind of view that was supposed to make a man feel powerful, but somehow only made Marcus feel more removed, more elevated, more separated from the pulse of actual human life. He showered in water filtered through a 5-stage purification system. He dressed in clothes selected the previous evening by his personal stylist. He consumed breakfast prepared by a chef, perfectly poached eggs, avocado sourced from a small farm in California, coffee from beans that had been hand-selected and shipped from a cooperative in Colombia. He did not cook. He did not commute. He did not wait. Waiting, Marcus had always believed, was for people who hadn't worked hard enough to eliminate it. His executive assistant, Priya, had been managing his schedule with military precision for 6 years, and she possessed the extraordinary ability to anticipate his needs before he articulated them. She knew he took his coffee at exactly 180 degrees. She knew he preferred meetings in the morning and phone calls never. She knew that when he rubbed the bridge of his nose with 2 fingers, it meant he was about to reject whatever proposal was on the table. She was, in many ways, more intimately acquainted with his professional habits than anyone alive. But even Priya didn't know the real reason Marcus had been sleeping poorly for the past 8 months. She didn't know about the 3 a.m. moments when he would stand at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse and watch the city breathe below him and feel something hollow and aching at the center of his chest that no nutritionist or sleep specialist or performance coach had been able to diagnose, because none of them were trained to identify the specific syndrome of a man who had spent so long building something magnificent that he had entirely forgotten to build a life. The members of his household staff were the closest thing Marcus had to a daily human connection, and even that relationship operated within boundaries, so formal they might as well have been constructed from reinforced steel. There were 6 of them, a chef, 2 housekeepers, a driver, a groundskeeper who managed the rooftop garden, and Rosa. Rosa Delgado had joined his household 14 months ago as a cleaning specialist, which was the title Marcus's HR department used instead of Maid, because his company's culture consultant had recommended more dignified terminology for all domestic roles. She was 28 years old, with dark hair, She kept pulled back in a practical bun during working hours and warm brown eyes that carried the particular expression of someone who has learned to navigate the world with quiet, unassuming competence. She was efficient, thorough, and almost completely invisible to Marcus in the way that all his household staff were invisible, present in the periphery of his daily existence, maintaining the machinery of his comfort, acknowledged with brief nods and the occasional "thank you," delivered with the distracted courtesy of a man whose mind was always somewhere 3 steps ahead of his body. He knew almost nothing about her. He didn't know she had a 3-year-old daughter named Lily, who spent most weekdays in a subsidized childcare program that Rosa had been on the waiting list for 18 months to access. He didn't know that Rosa commuted 90 minutes each way by bus and subway from a 2-bedroom apartment in the Bronx that she shared with her mother, who watched Lily on the 2 days per week the child care center was closed. He didn't know that Rosa had been sending money home to her family in Guatemala every month without fail for 6 years, that she was taking online accounting courses on her phone during her commute, that she had a laugh so warm and unrestrained that her neighbors in the Bronx had taken to calling her Sunshine in Spanish. He didn't know any of these things because he had never asked, had never thought to ask, had moved through his life so insulated by wealth and routine that the people who inhabited his periphery had remained precisely that, peripheral. The morning everything changed began with a catastrophe so mundane it was almost comic. Marcus's driver, Bernard, called at 7:15 a.m. with what he described in a mortified, apologetic voice as a situation. His car, the one Marcus used, a custom Mercedes S-Class with a personal air filtration system and massaging seats, had been rear-ended in the parking garage by a delivery truck. No one was hurt. The car was not severely damaged. But it would not be drivable for the day, and the backup vehicle was already committed to transporting Marcus's business partner to the airport for a 9 a.m. flight to Chicago. Priya offered solutions in rapid succession: a car service, a rental, a car from the pool at the office. But there was a problem with each option, a time constraint, a booking conflict, a logistical impossibility that Priya, for the first time in 6 years, could not instantly resolve. "Mr. Harrington," she said finally, and he could hear the discomfort in her voice, the professional distress of a person about to suggest something she anticipated he would find objectionable. "There is a bus stop 1 block from the building. The M15 would take you directly to the Midtown office in approximately 45 minutes. The silence that followed was long enough to become its own answer. "A bus," Marcus said. Not a question. More like a man repeating a word in a language he recognized but had never personally spoken. "Yes, sir." Another silence. Then, because the meeting he needed to reach was with investors whose time literally cost more than the GDP of small nations, and because there were simply no other options, Marcus Harrington said the 4 words that would quietly, irrevocably begin to dismantle and rebuild everything he thought he understood about the world he lived in. "Tell me which stop." The bus stop existed in a universe Marcus had never entered. He stood at the corner of 5th Avenue and 53rd Street at 7:42 a.m. in a charcoal Brioni suit that cost more than the monthly rent of every apartment on Rosa Delgado's block combined, holding a phone that had never been used to check a bus schedule, feeling a disorientation so complete it was almost physical. The morning air carried the mingled sense of exhaust, coffee from a bodega 3 doors down, and the particular urban perfume of a city in motion, warm asphalt and ambition, and the collective breath of 8 million lives intersecting and diverging with magnificent indifference. People streamed past him with a practiced urgency of experienced commuters. A woman in hospital scrubs ate a breakfast sandwich from a paper bag while simultaneously reading something on her phone. 2 teenage boys in backpacks argued good-naturedly about basketball in voices loud enough to include the entire sidewalk in their debate. An elderly man in a veteran's cap sat on a nearby bench and nodded at Marcus with the easy, democratic generosity of someone who extended courtesy to everyone equally, regardless of what their suit cost. Marcus nodded back, uncertain, feeling somehow like the least competent person on the block. The M15 arrived with a hydraulic sigh, its doors folding open to reveal a world Marcus had theoretically understood existed but had never personally inhabited, the compressed democracy of public transit, where a hedge fund manager and a hospital janitor and a bodega owner and a kindergarten teacher and an undocumented worker and a retired schoolteacher all occupied the same 40 feet of moving metal with absolutely no hierarchy other than whoever got to the empty seat first. He boarded. He stood frozen at the fare reader for 4 mortifying seconds before the driver, a large man with patient eyes and the name Darnell on his badge, said with a complete lack of condescension, "Tap your phone or card on the yellow pad, sir." And Marcus tapped his phone and moved deeper into the bus, feeling more genuinely humbled than he had in the entire preceding decade of professional life. The bus was full in the way that New York buses are full, not dangerously but completely, every seat occupied, a standing cluster near the doors, the atmosphere of people in motion, sharing the temporary intimacy of proximity. Marcus found a position near the rear, gripping the overhead bar with the careful uncertainty of a man performing an unfamiliar physical action, his expensive leather shoes planted wide on the rubber floor that was scuffed and clean and deeply, essentially democratic.
He saw Rosa before she saw him.
She was seated 4 rows ahead, which was the reason he recognized her a fraction of a second before surprise could arrange his expression into something dignified. The familiar dark bun, the practical jacket he'd seen her wearing on mornings when she arrived, the canvas bag on her lap that he now registered held, not her cleaning supplies, but a child. Lily Delgado was 3 years old and currently experiencing what appeared to be a determined conversation with a small stuffed elephant she was holding at eye level, conducting the dialogue with complete seriousness, the elephant's felt trunk being repositioned between each exchange with the methodical precision of a tiny diplomat arranging treaty negotiations. She had her mother's dark hair, cut in a short practical bob, and wore a purple jacket with a cat embroidered on the pocket and yellow rain boots that were completely unnecessary given the clear morning sky, but were evidently non-negotiable from a personal fashion perspective. She was, Marcus would think later, the most completely alive small person he had ever seen. There was nothing performed or managed about her. She existed in the full, unfiltered present tense of early childhood, where stuffed elephant conversations carried the same urgency as international crises and yellow rain boots were matters of deep aesthetic principle. Rosa noticed him approximately 30 seconds later, and the expression that crossed her face was a complicated and very human sequence: surprise, a flash of something close to alarm, the rapid professional recalibration of an employee unexpectedly encountering her employer outside the carefully defined architecture of their usual relationship. She straightened instinctively. "Mr. Harrington," she said, and her voice was careful and formal in the way it always was at work, stripped of whatever warmth he was beginning to understand her actual voice carried. "Good morning." "Good morning, Rosa." He heard himself sound normal, which felt like an accomplishment. "Car trouble?"
"Ah."
A small nod. She shifted Lily on her lap, and the toddler, who had been deeply engaged in the elephant negotiations, turned to assess this new arrival in her peripheral world with the fearless directness that only very small children and very old people seem to maintain. Lily looked at Marcus with enormous dark eyes that held absolutely no awareness of the concept of social hierarchy, and said clearly, "You're tall." Something shifted in Marcus's chest. A small, warm, entirely unexpected thing. "I am," he agreed. "My elephant is tall too," Lily said, presenting the stuffed animal for his consideration with the generous confidence of someone sharing a valuable asset. "He's very impressive," Marcus said, and he was surprised to discover he meant it completely. Rosa's eyes moved between her daughter and her employer with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and professional, and was losing the battle to something softer and slightly wondering. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "She talks to everyone." "Don't apologize," Marcus said, and something about the way he said it made Rosa look at him with a new, careful attention, as if she was reassessing a document she thought she'd already fully read. The bus lurched forward through a traffic bottleneck, and Marcus, caught off guard, tightened his grip on the overhead bar and shifted his weight with the undignified scramble of someone who had never learned to ride standing up. Lily watched this with interest. Then the bus stopped short at a crosswalk, a sudden pneumatic jolt, and Marcus's hand slipped from the bar. He would have caught himself. He was fine, not in real danger. But in the moment of instinctive reaching, before he had steadied himself, a small, warm hand found his. Lily had reached up from her mother's lap and taken two of Marcus Harrington's fingers in her entire fist, with the casual, unquestioning confidence of a child who has not yet learned that some people are not supposed to need steadying. She didn't look at him when she did it. She was already turning back to the elephant, repositioning it for the next round of diplomatic discussions. She held his fingers the way she might have held the bus seat edge or her mother's sleeve, not from sentiment, but from simple, instinctive human recognition. "You were falling. I had a hand. Here." Marcus stood very still. He held the overhead bar with his other hand and let a 3-year-old girl he had never spoken to hold two of his fingers, and felt something move through him that he did not have vocabulary for yet, something that started in his chest and spread outward through the architecture of all his carefully constructed certainties, a quiet, devastating warmth, like the first light coming through a window in a room that has been dark for a very long time. Rosa saw. He knew she saw, from the slight, sharp intake of breath, the way her hands went still on the canvas bag. She started to say something, probably another apology, the reflexive protective instinct of a parent whose child has overstepped, and Marcus shook his head slightly. Just slightly. Just enough. Rosa went quiet. And for the next 11 minutes, as the M15 moved through Midtown Manhattan carrying its democracy of strangers, a 33-year-old billionaire in a Brioni suit rode a bus for the first time in his life, while a 3-year-old girl held his hand and showed her stuffed elephant the city going past through the window, narrating each landmark with confident, invented authority. And something in Marcus Harrington, something locked and defended and armored for a very long time, began very quietly to open.
He thought about it all day.
The investor meeting happened. Numbers were exchanged, projections were discussed, hands were shaken across a conference table of Italian marble, and Marcus performed his role with the smooth confidence that 11 years of practice had made as automatic as breathing. He said the right things at the right moments. He projected the right combination of confidence and careful consideration that investors had come to expect from him. He was, by every observable measure, completely present and completely in command. But underneath all of it, like a song heard through a wall, persistent and impossible to unhear, he kept returning to 11 minutes on the M15 and 2 fingers held by a fist the size of a lemon. He had shaken hands with senators. He had sat across tables from tech giants who controlled the information flow of half the Western world. He had received standing ovations at conferences where tickets cost $3,000 and the audience contained some of the most powerful people in American industry. He was not a man unfamiliar with human contact or with the particular electricity of meaningful connection. But he could not remember the last time a human being had touched him without agenda. That was what he kept circling back to, all through the marble conference room, and the catered lunch of food he barely tasted, and the afternoon calls that Priya had stacked like blocks in his calendar. Every handshake he could remember in recent years had carried the particular weight of transaction, the warm grip of someone who wanted something, or the firm press of someone confirming they had received it. Every touch existed inside a context of professional exchange, of social performance, of the elaborate ongoing theater of powerful people demonstrating their power through the choreography of their interactions. Lily had held his fingers because he was a person who was falling and she had a hand available. No calculation. No awareness of his net worth or his professional reputation or the power differential between her mother's position in his household and his position at the apex of a billion-dollar enterprise. She had operated from the pure, uncontaminated logic of a 3-year-old. Person needs studying. I can help. Here. Marcus sat in his office at 4:30 p.m., which was rarely empty of calls and meetings until well past 7, and stared at the Manhattan skyline through floor-to-ceiling glass and thought about Rosa. He called Priya. "Pull Rosa Delgado's employment file for me," he said. A pause, brief, professional, entirely non-judgmental. "Of course, Mr. Harrington. Shall I send it to your personal tablet?"
Yes.
"And Priya, I'd like to speak with the HR director. Tomorrow morning, before the 9 a.m. Another pause, fractionally longer. "I'll arrange it." He read Rosa's file that evening, sitting in his penthouse kitchen, not at his desk, which felt somehow too formal for what he was doing, which was the simple, overdue act of learning about a person who had been present in his daily life for 14 months. He sat at the kitchen island in a gray cashmere sweater, the city glowing through the window behind him, and read. Rosa Elena Delgado, 28 years old. Born in Guatemala City, immigrated to the United States at 19 with her mother and younger brother. Currently resident in the Bronx. Single mother. One dependent child, Liliana Delgado, age 3. Employment history showed consistent excellence, 3 previous household positions, all with strong references, all citing reliability, discretion, and quality of work. No absences without notice in 14 months with Marcus's household. Current wage, $22 per hour, 30 hours per week. No benefits beyond the legally required. He read the last line twice. No benefits beyond the legally required. He thought about the canvas bag. He thought about the 90-minute commute, one way. He thought about the childcare center, which he now spent 40 minutes researching online, learning about the waiting lists and the subsidy qualifications, and the Byzantine complexity of accessing affordable early childhood care in New York City. He thought about the online accounting courses, which he found listed in a section of her file where the HR department had noted additional education because Rosa had disclosed them when asked about professional development. She was studying accounting on her phone on the bus between his apartment and the Bronx while she raised a child alone and sent money home to family abroad and showed up every day to maintain the perfection of a home that belonged to a man who had never once asked her a single question about her life. The hollow ache in Marcus's chest, the one that had been keeping him awake at 3 a.m. for 8 months, shifted. It didn't disappear, but it changed quality, changed character, moved from the undefined, sourceless loneliness of a man adrift to something sharper and more specific, more instructive. This was not just the ache of a man who had forgotten to build a life. This was the specific discomfort of a person beginning to understand that their ordinary behavior, the behavior they had never questioned because it was simply how things were done, had been missing something essential, something irreducibly human. He had been kind to his staff in the way that a person could be technically kind without ever seeing them. He had paid competitive wages, which he had let an HR department determine. He had provided decent working conditions, which a facilities manager maintained. He had said thank you with the automatic courtesy that his mother had instilled in him and that he had preserved as a social habit long after he had stopped feeling the actual texture of what he was thanking anyone for. He had not been cruel. He had not been dismissive in any aggressive or conscious way. He had simply been absent. Present in body, in the physical space his household revolved around, and absent in the deeper sense, the human sense, the sense that matters. He had moved through 14 months of Rosa's quiet, consistent, dignified presence and never once extended to her the basic gift of genuine curiosity. That night, Marcus did something he had not done in years.
He cooked. Badly.
With ingredients from the meticulously stocked refrigerator that he now understood had been maintained by human beings with lives and commutes and children and dreams, he made pasta, overcooked, underseasoned, the sauce from a jar that his chef would have removed from the premises in professional horror, and he sat alone at the kitchen island and ate it and thought about what came next. He was a man who had built an empire by identifying problems with clarity and then solving them with decisive, creative, sustained commitment. He had done this with technology. He had done this with business structures and market opportunities and organizational inefficiencies. He had never once applied this capacity to his own life, to the texture of his daily human existence, to the question of what it meant to actually live among people rather than above them, elevated by wealth into a kind of magnificent, airless isolation that he had somehow confused with success. Lily's small hand had asked, without words, without any awareness of the question it was posing, whether Marcus Harrington was reachable. He was beginning to understand that the answer he gave was entirely up to him. He didn't arrange the conversation formally. He had considered it, had thought about scheduling a meeting through Priya, about creating a proper professional context with HR present, about the careful choreography that his position typically required when engaging directly with household staff on matters beyond the immediate tasks of their employment. He had been advised by his culture consultant, in a session he now remembered with some discomfort, that maintaining appropriate professional distance with domestic employees was essential for clear role definition and mutual comfort. He had followed that advice for years. It was, he now understood, one of many professional recommendations he had implemented without ever interrogating whether its fundamental premise was actually true or whether it served the people it claimed to protect. What he did instead was wait until Thursday morning, when Rosa arrived for her regular shift, and when she came through the service entrance and began her usual preparation, he was in the kitchen, not in his office, not in the penthouse's upper floors where he spent most of his time while staff worked below, and he had made coffee. Real coffee, not the automated single-serve machine that produced perfect results at the touch of a button, but coffee from the stovetop espresso maker he had found in a cabinet and remembered, dimly, belonged to a period several years ago when he had made coffee himself. It was not excellent coffee, but it was coffee made by a human hand with actual effort, which gave it a quality the automated machine could not replicate.
Rosa stopped when she saw him.
The careful professional neutrality came down, as it always did, like a visor, the specific expression of a person managing the distance of their role. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington." "Good morning." "Rosa, would you sit down for a moment?" The professional neutrality flickered.
"Just barely."
"Is there a problem with?" "No," he said quickly. "Nothing wrong. I just wanted to talk." He heard how the words sounded, how unusual they were in the context of their existing relationship, and he pushed through the awkwardness with the directness that had served him in business and now, perhaps a decade late, was going to have to serve him in actual human life. About Lily. And the bus. And, honestly, about the fact that I've been an employer who never learned anything about the people who work for me, and I think that was wrong. Rosa was very still. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't fully read, careful, watchful, the expression of a person who has learned to be cautious about unexpected kindness from people in power, because unexpected kindness from people in power has a way of arriving with conditions attached. He understood that expression now. He hadn't before the bus. Before the small hand. "Please," he said. "Sit down. Have coffee." I'm not going to make this strange. She sat. She accepted the coffee with both hands around the cup, the posture of someone receiving warmth after cold. She looked at him across the kitchen island where he'd eaten his terrible pasta 3 nights ago, and he saw her deciding, in real time, how much to trust. Lily is wonderful, he said. It was the easiest truth to start with. She was on the bus. She was remarkable. The elephant, the boots. Something happened to Rosa's face when he said her daughter's name. The professional visor didn't just flicker. It dissolved, replaced by an expression so warm and unguarded and real that it changed the entire quality of the room. She insisted on the boots, Rosa said, and her voice was different now, the careful formality entirely gone, replaced by something natural and musical and full of the specific exasperated affection of parents discussing their children's most committed absurdities. It wasn't raining. It hasn't rained in 2 weeks. She told me it might rain later. She was being proactive, Marcus said. Rosa laughed. It was exactly the laugh he would have predicted once he understood she was called Sunshine in the Bronx, full and warm and completely unrestrained, the laugh of someone who has held joy carefully in professional contexts for so long that its release, when it comes, arrives with the force of something that has been patient for a very long time. They talked for 47 minutes. He learned about Guatemala City and about her mother, Catalina, who was 61 years old and had the energy of someone 30 years younger and an opinion about everything and a garden on the apartment fire escape where she grew tomatoes and herbs and a pepper plant she had named Fernando. He learned about the online accounting courses, 3 semesters in, 1 more to go, with a 94% average that she delivered as a fact rather than a boast, with the quiet pride of someone who has achieved something meaningful in the margins of an already full life. He learned about the child care center, the 18-month waiting list, the 2 days each week when Lily stayed with Catalina and Rosa had to manage her commute with different timing. He learned that Lily had recently become obsessed with dinosaurs, specifically the Triceratops, and that she had given every stuffed animal she owned a dinosaur name regardless of what species they actually were, which meant the stuffed elephant was named Trissy. He told her things too. Not the professional biography, she could have found that in any magazine, but the things underneath. The 3 a.m. window standing. The hollow ache. The terrible pasta. The way he had read her file on Tuesday evening and felt ashamed in a productive way, in the way that shame can be productive when it arrives with enough clarity to point toward change. Rosa listened with the quality of attention that he was beginning to recognize as her particular gift, focused, warm, completely present, the attention of someone who has had to navigate complex situations by reading people accurately and has developed, over years of careful practice, an exceptional capacity for genuinely hearing what was actually being said rather than just what words were spoken. I don't want to make your role at work uncomfortable, Marcus said, when he was sure he'd said what needed saying. I'm not. I want to be clear that nothing I'm discussing today changes anything about your employment unless you want it to. You have every right to keep our professional relationship exactly as it's been. Rosa looked at him steadily. What are you saying that it could change? I spoke with HR, he said. Your salary is being increased to $35 an hour, effective immediately with full benefits, health, dental, vision for you and Lily. The schedule is changing to guarantee full-time hours with overtime rates. He paused. And I want to fund the remainder of your accounting certification program. Whatever it costs, including a laptop that isn't a phone, and whatever support you need to finish and take the next step. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Rosa's hands had gone very still on the coffee cup. He watched something move through her expression, disbelief first, the reflexive suspicion of someone who has learned to check the fine print of good news, and then something more complicated, more layered, the experience of a person receiving genuine, uncomplicated generosity without immediately knowing what to do with it because it arrives in a shape they haven't previously encountered. Why? She asked. Simply, directly. The question of someone who needed to understand the actual architecture of what was being offered. Because it's right, Marcus said. Because I should have done it sooner. Because your daughter held my hand on a bus and reminded me that people are just people, and I had forgotten. The weeks that followed were not dramatic. That was what Marcus noticed most, the absence of drama, the lack of cinematic sweep in the ways that genuine change tends to actually manifest. There was no single transformative moment. There was no grand gesture. There was a series of small, deliberate decisions made by a man who had finally started paying attention, accumulating quietly like the first weeks of spring. He started learning people's names. Not just Rose's, all of them. Bernard the driver, who had been with the household for 3 years and had a daughter starting college in September, and a deep devotion to the New York Knicks that had cost him significant emotional energy over the preceding decade. Diane, the head housekeeper, who grew orchids in her apartment in Astoria and had been trying for 4 years to get a particular variety to bloom and had recently, triumphantly, succeeded. Chun, the chef, who had left a Michelin-starred restaurant to take this position because the hours were more compatible with caring for his elderly father and who harbored a quiet dream of writing a cookbook that bridged traditional Cantonese techniques with American regional ingredients. These were not performances. He wasn't learning names to demonstrate something or to fulfill a corporate wellness initiative about team culture. He was learning names because he had spent too many years inside a poverty of attention, the specific poverty of a person surrounded by others and genuinely, functionally alone, and the remedy for that particular poverty was simply to start seeing. He rode the bus twice more in the following 3 weeks. Not always with Rosa and Lily. Once alone on a Saturday morning, going nowhere in particular, just riding, letting the city exist around him at street level and human speed instead of through the insulated remove of a private car. He watched the way people interacted, the small courtesies, the offered seats, the shared phone screen showing a friend a photo, the toddler in a stroller who made eyes at an elderly woman until she smiled back with her entire face, the everyday, unremarkable transactions of human beings negotiating shared space with more grace than he'd given the world credit for. He had been observing life from 11.4 billion feet above it. Coming down was slower and more instructive than he had anticipated. Lily came to the penthouse for the first time on a Saturday in November, when Rosa was covering an extra shift and Catalina had a doctor's appointment that couldn't be moved. Marcus had offered, genuinely, simply, without elaborate ceremony, and Rosa had accepted with the careful trust of a woman who had decided, after several weeks of watching, that the evidence supported the offer being what it appeared to be. Lily arrived in yellow boots, different pair, same conviction, a pink jacket and the Trissy elephant, and she walked into the penthouse with a complete, fearless assessment of a 3-year-old conducting a territorial survey. She moved through the main living room with her chin up and her eyes wide, examining the city view from the floor-to-ceiling windows with the expression of a scientist observing a new specimen.
Big, she said.
Yes, Marcus agreed. Why? I have more space than I need, he said. He had never said this out loud before. It was, he reflected, simply true. Lily considered this. Then, with the pragmatic problem-solving of a person for whom the gap between question and solution is as yet uncomplicated by adult hesitations, you should put more stuff in it. What kind of stuff? She thought seriously. A slide. And dinosaurs. And more elephants. Trissy is lonely. Marcus looked at the high-ceilinged, minimally furnished, museum-perfect living room of his $11 million penthouse and thought, she is not wrong. They spent 4 hours together while Rosa worked through the extra shift, and it was the most unguarded, consistently delightful 4 hours Marcus had spent in recent memory. Lily was constitutionally incapable of pretension. She engaged with everything directly, said exactly what she observed, asked every question that occurred to her with the assumption that all questions deserved real answers. She wanted to know why buildings were tall, to fit more people, why the city had so many lights, because so many people needed to see, why Marcus lived alone. This one he answered honestly, because he had been too busy working to pay attention to loneliness, which she received with a nod of grave understanding before suggesting he get a fish. She fell asleep on the couch at 2 p.m. with Trissy tucked under her chin, and Marcus sat across from her in the chair that normally held only the specific weight of solitude, and felt something in his chest settle. Not disappear. The loneliness had not magically resolved. The years of constructed isolation did not unwind in an afternoon. But the ache had a direction now. It was pointing somewhere. It was pointing toward the world at street level and bus stop speed, toward people whose lives he had been adjacent to without entering, toward the simple and available and apparently inexhaustible resource of genuine human attention. Rosa came back at 3 p.m. and found them both quiet, Lily asleep, Marcus sitting with a book he'd found on a shelf that he'd apparently purchased and never read, looking more peaceful than Rosa had seen him look in 14 months of working in his space. She stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at her daughter's sleeping face, the familiar rise and fall, and then at the man sitting across the room reading in the afternoon light with the careful, slightly unfamiliar posture of someone learning how to be still. "She's a good teacher," Rosa said softly. "The best," Marcus said, and meant it completely. The announcement came in December, and it came from Marcus himself, delivered not through a press release drafted by his communications team, but in a company-wide address that Priya later described to her husband as the most honest thing I've heard him say in 6 years. He stood before the 600 employees of Harrington Digital Solutions in the main auditorium of their Manhattan headquarters, the building that still bore his name in letters large enough to read from 3 blocks away, and he told them the truth. "I've spent 11 years building something I'm genuinely proud of," he said. "And I have spent those same 11 years being, as a human being within this company and within my own household, significantly less than what I could have been. I've been efficient. I've been effective. Most of my professional relationships would confirm, fair. But I have not been present, not in the way that actually matters, not in the way that makes a workplace something more than a mechanism for generating returns." He told them, in broad terms without specifics that would compromise anyone's privacy, about the bus,
About the hand.
about the file he had read on Tuesday evening, and the terrible pasta and the 47-minute conversation over bad stovetop coffee that had been worth more to him than every meeting he'd attended in a marble conference room in the preceding year. He told them about the changes. Comprehensive benefits expansion, effective January 1st, for all full-time and contracted employees across every level of the company, including the household staff, the building services teams, the contracted care workers whose invisible labor had been supporting his world while he had been carefully maintaining the infrastructure of his own comfort. Parental leave policies doubled. A fund established, $10 million, drawn from his personal holdings, for emergency financial assistance available to all employees regardless of seniority, for medical crises, housing emergencies, childcare gaps, the 1,000 unexpected devastations that life delivers indiscriminately and that financial insecurity makes catastrophic. An education program, not a corporate tuition reimbursement policy. Those existed already, underutilized, buried in an HR manual no one read. A real program, personally designed with input from the employees themselves about what they actually needed, flexible scheduling to accommodate study time, mentorship connections, financial support that covered not just tuition but the practical costs of learning, technology, childcare during class hours, the time that education requires that no one names but everyone has to find. "I'm not standing here telling you I've suddenly become a different person," Marcus said. "I'm telling you I've started paying attention. And I think paying attention is the beginning of everything." The applause was not the polished, conference room applause of people performing appreciation for a powerful man's statement. It was something more complicated and more real, the applause of people who had waited, in some cases for years, to be seen by the person whose name was on the building and who were trying to process in real time what it meant that the waiting appeared to be over. Rosa was not in that auditorium. She was not an employee of the company. She worked for Marcus's household, and her employment arrangements had already changed in the ways he had described at the kitchen island over bad coffee. But she heard about the speech from Priya, who called her because Priya had decided, in the 6 years she'd worked for Marcus, that she was a good enough judge of people to recognize when someone's life had been quietly, fundamentally altered by an encounter with another, and she thought Rosa deserved to know what her daughter had set in motion. Rosa listened to Priya's account sitting on the floor of Lily's bedroom in the Bronx, where Lily was conducting a complex sorting activity involving every stuffed animal she owned, and an organizational system that Rosa had not been able to decode despite 30 minutes of observation. "He talked about the bus?" Rosa asked. "He didn't name you," Priya said. "He just said, a bus, a child, a hand. And everything that followed." Rosa was quiet for a moment. Lily looked up from her sorting with the accurate social perception of small children who read emotional atmosphere with instruments more sensitive than most adults possess. She put down the stuffed bear she had been repositioning and crawled across the floor to her mother and put both arms around Rosa's neck with the complete, uncomplicated fullness of a child whose love has no economy, no reservations, no conditions. "Mama sad?" Lily asked. "No, baby," Rosa said, and her voice was the complicated voice of a person feeling more than one large thing at once and finding none of their usual words quite adequate. She held her daughter and breathed the scent of her hair, lavender shampoo and something under it, something elemental and irreplaceable, the specific warm geography of the person she loved most in the world. "Mama's really, really good." The accounting certification was completed in February. Rosa received the certificate on a Thursday morning, having taken the final exam on her phone on the bus, as she had taken every quiz and completed every assignment and participated in every virtual study session for the past 3 semesters, and the score came back at 97%. And she sat on the M15 moving through the city and cried quietly for approximately 4 minutes before putting her phone in her bag and looking out the window at the morning arriving over the buildings and feeling the specific, earned, unambiguous pride of a person who has kept a promise to themselves through every difficulty that life placed across the path. Marcus hired her, not as a cleaning specialist, as a junior accounts coordinator in the financial operations division of Harrington Digital Solutions, a position with full benefits, competitive salary, regular hours, professional development pathway, and the proximity to people and systems and problems that her education had prepared her to actually engage with. He made the offer with the same directness he had tried to practice since November. No performance, no elaborate framing, just the clear and honest statement of what the position was and why he believed she was ready for it. "This isn't charity," he said, and his voice was serious because he needed her to know he meant it. "You have a 94% average in a rigorous certification program completed under conditions that most people would have used as a reason not to finish. You are exactly the kind of person this company needs and has not historically valued correctly." Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then, "And the household position?" "We'll work with the staffing agency to find a replacement. You can help transition. Or, if you prefer, the timeline is entirely yours."
She took the job.
Lily, upon being informed that her mother was starting a new job, asked several practical questions about whether the new job had an elevator, whether Marcus would be there, and whether there was a possibility of the slide installation she had recommended in November. She was told the elevator situation was positive, Marcus would be around, and the slide was under consideration. She accepted these answers as satisfactory and returned to Trissy. The slide, it should be noted, was installed in the penthouse in March. Not in the living room, Rosa's suggestion, but in the rooftop space, which Marcus had the groundskeeper redesign into something genuinely usable as a place people might actually want to be, with a sandbox and a small garden, and a spot for Catalina's pepper plants, and a slide that Lily rode 11 times on the first day and declared excellent. Marcus rode it once. He was 33 years old and 6'2", and it was designed for children, and he had to fold himself into an undignified tuck to fit, and Lily watched from the bottom with her arms out in case he needed catching, which she had decided was her job. He reached the bottom in a wash of undignified laughter that surprised him so completely it arrived before he could manage it, full and unrestrained and real, the laugh of a person who has remembered that joy is available and immediate and requires nothing more than willingness. Lily caught his hands when he landed, just as she had on the bus. The same easy confidence, the same uncomplicated instinct. You might need steadying. Here is my hand. He held on, and in the warmth of a March morning on a rooftop in Manhattan, surrounded by a pepper plant named Fernando and a sandbox, and the view of a city that had always been there at street level waiting for him to come down, Marcus Harrington understood the full weight of what an $11 billion empire had never been able to provide, and what a 3-year-old girl in yellow boots had given him on a bus without knowing she was giving him anything at all. The certainty, simple, complete, long delayed, that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Among people, within reach, finally truly home.